everybody. Welcome to the fifth in a series of 7 live webinars in honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Thank you for joining in and for those of you rejoining us. I'm Frances Littman, the founder of the Creatively United for the Planet nonprofit society and your host for this week. I'd like to acknowledge we are hosting this webinar on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people here on beautiful Vancouver Island, for whom we give thanks for this privilege and their stewardship from time eternal. We have much to learn. On behalf of Creatively United and our EarthFest partners, John O'Riordan of the Gail O'Riordan Climate and the Arts Legacy Series and the Wildwood Ecoforest Institute Society, we welcome you all from near and far on this international webinar. Today, we have 4 incredibly knowledgeable presenters, Poran Desai, Jack Anderson, Kent Netwig, and Chad Thiessen. All have years of experience in land use planning and sustainable development. Today, we have the good fortune to learn how homes and communities can be happier, healthier, more resilient, and cost efficient. Joining us from the UK, where it is now 7 o'clock at night, is Poran Desai. Poran is an eco-entrepreneur, author, and sustainability leader with experience in sustainable forestry, farming, and green real estate development. In 1998, Poran put together the world-renowned Beddington Zero fossil-free energy development known as the BedZ Eco Village. And in 2002, he created an international One Planet Living initiative used by cities around the world. In 2004, he was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire, and in 2009, made an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Wow. And in 2011, with bioregional co-founder Sue Riddlestone, he was named European Social Entrepreneur of the Year by the World Economic Forum's Schwab Foundation. Last year, Poran established OnePlanet.com, a revolutionary new digital platform for collaborative systems change, which we'll also hear about today. Welcome, Poran. How are things there for you, especially during this time of this lockdown?
Yes, thanks, Francis. Yeah, I mean, it's lovely weather here, so we all want to get out, but it's we're in our 5th week now of having to stay indoors. I mean, we can go out once a day, so wow. Not too bad, but yeah, we're looking forward to the end of this.
I bet. Once a day. Gee, do they give everybody different times so everybody's not out at the same time?
No, it's up to us to behave ourselves.
Well, thank goodness. So Poran, you created an award-winning zero-carbon mixed-use community 20 years ago. That was the first of its kind in recent history in southern London. Please tell us a bit more about your creation of BedZ. How did it come about and what's it all about?
Thanks very much, Francis, for that introduction. Yeah, I've been involved in sustainability for over 30 years, as Francis said, in forestry, farming, and then green real estate development. So it's been a really, really interesting journey, and as much a personal journey as a professional one. And as Francis said, actually our forays into developing sustainable communities started with this project, BedZ, Beddington Zero Fossil Energy Development, in South London. It's where Bioregional's headquarters are. So Bioregional was the organization I co-founded over 25 years ago. It's where our headquarters were, and actually where I lived for almost 20 years. And it was a really fantastic project in its time, really pushed the boat out. We ran it completely on renewable energy. We introduced the first car sharing scheme into England. We looked at creating a whole sustainable lifestyle. And it's been brilliant. It's a very neighborly place. Not all the technologies worked. We had to make some changes. And to be fair, we learned as much how not to do things as how to do things. But it's performing very well overall on environmental grounds. And also the average person here in this development knows 20 of their neighbors by name, which is something like 4 times the UK average. So it's been very good at bringing or building social capital, as well as delivering environmental benefits. And it was really analysing that project that we started phrasing things in terms of a one planet challenge. So this was back in 2002, and we had 27 university research projects creating lots and lots of data, and we were looking at the patterns in that data, we realized we couldn't really replicate or scale this unless we created a narrative, a story. So data is all very well, but you can't make decisions on the basis of data, much as people think you can. You actually have to do it on the basis of values, your values. You know, data won't tell you what decisions to make. You have to combine the data with a set of values. And really to use those values effectively, you have to create a narrative. So we started talking about one planet living. How can we lead happy, healthy lives within the environmental limits of our one planet? And created a framework with 10 very simple principles, or values, if you like, on which to design sustainable communities, or even it's been used by cities, by retailers, by manufacturing companies. So we wanted to create a cross-sector narrative, because building sustainable communities is not just about building what's within the boundaries of your development. It's also about how does it link into the wider world, and how can it integrate with the surrounding community, how can it integrate with products and services that are required for that community. And over the last whatever that is, 18 years or so, I've had the privilege of leading, and until last year, Bioregional's One Planet Living initiative, writing, developing zero carbon plans for projects all around the world. So it's been a fantastic experience, and I'll just share a few. I've been raised money for some of our own real estate development, as well as acting an advisor to others. So this is one of the projects that we put together. It's 172 apartments in Brighton. It's run 100% on renewable energy at a cost saving to the residents. It actually delivered above benchmark profits. We joint ventured with a mainstream house builder on this. And because we've designed it around healthier lifestyles, and for example, there are no private cars in this development. Here's one of our residents who, she and her husband moved in, adopted a healthier lifestyle, and in 18 months they lost 35 kilos or 80 pounds between them by adopting a healthier lifestyle. And we know we've got an epidemic of obesity, diabetes. And so the opportunity is to really design communities to be much healthier through design. This is another community not too far from you, I think, on Bainbridge Island in Seattle, 140 units, again, zero carbon homes with space in between for food grain and different generations to work together. The single intervention which is most important or most effective at building sustainable communities is actually removing cars from the development and reducing car dependence. So the more you can get rid of cars in a development, the better sustainable community you will have. Just as the top one tip that I would have. This is in Ottawa, ZB, the islands in the middle of the Ottawa River, again being designed as a one planet community. First apartments complete. It's another project we worked with Disney Europe on. It's a one planet resort. I mean, this is a sort of middle market holiday destination, not an upmarket holiday destination, but it's Europe's largest swimming complex, all heated on geothermal energy, 1,000 holiday apartments. We're generating so much geothermal energy, we're now exporting it to the main Disney land complex in Paris and reducing its carbon footprint. So absolutely fabulous one planet experience there. And also applying it across Africa on landscape scale developments, like this conservation and development project, 1,400 square kilometers of Serengeti, all the staff in hospitality, in wildlife protection, in food growing, are all trained in the One Planet Living principles. And there you can see the solar farm that we worked with them to introduce to run this particular camp in the middle of Tanzania. But you know, we know we're heading for a carbon crunch. This was published in Nature a few years ago. This was actually in 2015. So they were saying then, look, we should be peaking our carbon emissions by 2016 to have that blue sort of more gentle descent. If we peak by 2020, which actually we might do as a byproduct of coronavirus, we would need to go on that yellow sort of curve. But if we don't peak till 2025, we would have to basically stop carbon emissions overnight in order to avoid what we now know would be catastrophic climate change. So, you know, we really need to realize also, with all the other things that are happening in our environment, that the time is now. This is when we have to act. And for me, sustainability is all about making the connections between what we build, how dependent that makes us on cars, if they're run on fossil fuels. You know, they create pollutants which affect our health, they contribute to climate change, they support the oil industry, which also creates single-use plastics, which end up in the oceans. If we eat the fish from the oceans now, we're filling ourselves up with microplastics. We don't know what that's doing. You know, it's killing penguins as well. So, you know, we need to have tools which enable us to see and manage those connections. And that's why we've spent a lot of time and effort creating a set of digital tools which enable us to use the One Planet Living framework, or any framework, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to help create plans, joined up plans for how we might create a sustainable community or a sustainable city or a sustainable company. So we're very excited by the potential to help people see connections, join the dots, and create more joined up plans, and to connect those plans together to collaborate in radically new ways. And in fact, we've been deploying this, for example, in Oxford in the UK, and that sort of visualization process showing how things are interconnected can make, as Councillor Tom Hayes says, complex and often overwhelming processes simple and accessible. So, you know, we need a story, we need a set of values, and we need ways to communicate that which can engage people in an easy way. So it's a massive opportunity now to do the right thing. You can have a go on oneplanet.com free. You can start creating your own simple plans. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you want to know more. And we have been working in Saanich with the city of Saanich and with local partners One Earth on looking at applying One Planet Living in the city of Saanich, and have been speaking also about doing it at an island-wide scale on Vancouver Island. And thanks to One Earth, our partners on Vancouver Island, who helped us with that.
Wow, I have to say, Poran, it's really exciting. Creatively United is part of One Planet Saanich. And I've always been curious, like, how did you make the connection to Saanich, BC, all the way from where you are? How did that come about?
That was through One Earth, actually. So we, One Earth, who are a great not-for-profit, based in Vancouver City, but also with Cora, who may be on this call, who's based in Saanich itself, I think, or at least on Vancouver Island. And we just put feelers out for cities who might like to collaborate. And Saanich and the City Council, who have been brilliant, came forward and said, yeah, we'll have a go.
Yeah, we're very proud of the fact that Saanich has jumped on, declared a climate emergency, is doing this type of thing, as are so many of our other municipalities. Is there some advice you can give to people? Like I'm sure we have some councillors and mayors and developers, a bunch of people on this call for sure that would love to know just a little bit more, like how they might get involved at that level.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been. You know, the One Planet principles are free for anyone to use. So, you know, you can start using the principles. We do say if you are saying you're using, you know, saying you're using them, you should publish a plan on our platform, and you can do that for free, just so that people know what you're doing. But I think that my advice is, keep it simple. People make sustainability much more complicated than it needs to be. It's really quite simple, and so keep it simple. Don't use a lot of jargon. Just talk to people about how we can improve. We can work together to improve our own lives, improve our health, and do things which are good for the economy, good for people, and good for the planet.
I always say what's old is new again, actually, because the kind of communities that we're talking about now are very much what they've always been. It's just been modern history that has segregated people and taken us away from that land in the city type of thing. So can you tell us, like, what have you learned that you would or wouldn't do again?
Okay, so what I would do is as far as possible, as I said again, the thing which really makes communities more sustainable and actually improves health and community spirit, brings social capital, is the more you can reduce dependence on the car, and the more you can actually get rid of cars from communities. So people can't walk straight out of their houses into their cars and not past their neighbors. We're naturally social beings. As soon as you get rid of the car, people start talking to their neighbors. And you create that resilience at a local level. So take with this coronavirus and lockdown, you can see that if you know your neighbors, actually, you can help out the old people in your community with shopping. If you're, anyone had any problems, they just posted up on the Facebook page, and someone in the community would help them, whether it was, having to go to the shops, or I want to borrow a drill, or I've got some leftover food, I don't want to throw it away, does anyone want it? So yeah, I would say look at getting rid of the car. The second thing is, people get obsessed with generating renewable energy on site. And there are times when it's right, but actually the most efficient way of generating renewable energy is large scale renewables. People worry about distribution, energy losses in distribution systems, but they are about 10%, but you can so much more efficiently generate renewables on a large scale than a small scale, that I think people get hung up on micro renewables. Now, there is a place for them. I'm not saying there isn't a place, but really, look at zero carbon energy systems at the level of regions, or the level of islands even, and generate what you can on site, but don't get obsessed with concepts like net zero carbon. They are, engineers love it, and they will spend your money like no one's business.
Yeah, good points. I just want to go back now that, people are seeing these empty roads. I think we've maybe become more aware of how much asphalt is actually really around us, and how much money goes into that type of infrastructure. And I also think in terms of, look at all the cars that are sitting there in nice cozy garages and homes where we've got homeless people where those cars should be. So the opportunity to switch from that and make homes where there were garages and grow food where there were driveways to me, it just makes so much sense. So let's hope we're moving in that direction. Is there anything you'd like to add at this time? Because we're going to come back with questions later from the audience.
No, I would just say we are moving from sustainability as a nice to have to be a survival, actually. So interestingly, one of the areas which adopted One Planet Living is in California, and in fact it started to be taught in schools there, particularly one school called Credo School under under the leadership of the education director Chip Romer, but really led by someone called Marika Ramsden, and she started introducing a One Planet curriculum. So the school actually moved into a One Planet community in a repurposed data center, actually, along with other businesses, so it got converted into a One Planet business park, and now the residential is starting to be built as well. So school moved in there, and they adopted One Planet Living as a core part of the curriculum. So the kids, the high school kids, got taught in their first week about One Planet Living, and all their lessons are related back to how we can live happy, healthy lives in the limits of one planet. And I asked Chip, why did you do this? Why did you, Marika suggested it. Why did you take on Marika's suggestions? And he said, because I think sustainability is a core life skill. It's not nice to have. And in fact, the following year, a lot of the kids lost their homes in the fires in California. And so it was very poignant. And those fires are getting worse with climate change. So yeah, sustainability is not a nice to have, it's a core life skill, and we better prepare ourselves if we want to survive and thrive in the next few years, next few decades.
Hear, hear, and thank you so much for leading the charge on that, Poran, and keeping that going. So one more time, One Planet, your website that you...
Yeah, oneplanet.com. Just go there. You can create a free login, play around with the tool, and you can see what some other people are starting to do around the world.
Very exciting. We're going to come back with questions for you later, but we're going to move on now to Jack Anderson, who is our next presenter. Thank you so much, Poran. Jack Anderson is a fifth-generation Nanaimo-born resident and lives and works in the Cedar area of southern Nanaimo. He's been a landmark figure for sustainable development for more than 25 years. Jack's refined ability to make sustainable buildings a reality stems from his experience as a municipal planner and committee member. The skills and knowledge and insights Jack imparts were hard-won as a trailblazer in the development of green building concepts. Welcome, Jack. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and happy birthday, by the way.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. This is obviously an honor to be able to have an opportunity to share insights far and wide, and I'm excited about the day.
Jack has, just to let you know, Jack has been on Creatively United, our YouTube channel. You can find some videos there, but he was also part of our Earth Day last year. And Jack, you are always a wealth of knowledge. Every time I hear you, I learn something new. So over to you.
Well, thank you again. Thanks very much. First of all, I want to talk about development here in the Vancouver Island, where I have familiarity. So it's unique because it's a nice complement to what Poran has been doing in some larger urban centers. Most of my stuff has been done in the more rural environment. The critical piece for me is I've been focused on sustainability for many years, and I'm now realizing that it's not just important for us to be able to be long-term sustainable, but we also need to be resilient. Our planet is in an element of crisis, and we see future challenges coming forward, and then it's critical for us to recognize how we can make the world a better place for future generations. So the resilience is now as equally as important as sustainability in my world. I'm going to talk about the individual homes, and I'm going to talk about neighborhood scale developments. And critical as we move forward to thinking about sustainability is that every building has to be custom fit. You can't just cookie cutter any development. You need to recognize where the sun's coming from, where the winds are, how you can site the home so you can optimize the property, take advantage of the slopes. In this, for us, we concern ourselves with our south exposure in the southern hemisphere. Of course, you guys will be considering the north exposure as most valuable. This is an image I'm going to come back to because it showcases a cut through of a typical sustainable home that we are looking at exploring in here. So the first piece that we talk about when we talk about sustainability is the shelter. We want to talk about the building envelope. Conservation is always first. You can't begin to think about your alternatives for energy sources, water sources, etc., until you talk about conservation. In the context of a building, it is the building envelope. And so our critical factor here is optimizing the thermal resistance of that building envelope. And in that, we're talking about your walls and roof membranes. So in walls, we're looking at R35 to R45 where we can achieve it. In ceilings, etc., we'd like to see R60s in there. But one of the weak points for us is that we have our windows, which even with triple pane windows in this part of the world are only going to give you an R7 at best. And in a situation like that, that becomes where your major heat loss is. So we have to think dynamically as well and be creative with window insulation and blinds in the summertime to keep us from overheating in there as well. So that's a critical piece for us as we talk about the envelope. One of the great challenges, of course, is that buildings have always proved to be a massive hit in terms of our carbon footprint on the land. And so we want to explore how we can do this. Here's an image of an autonomous house that we're looking to build here in the near future. This house has a super R value. We're looking at being off the water, the hydro, and the septic grids, and therefore in that context we consider it autonomous. Critical piece to this is that it gives us an opportunity to do that all in one. So what can we do about the carbon footprint? And in that, I want to share some excitement about a new innovation here in Canada, an upstart company called Just Biofiber that has come out with a new product. This is a brilliant inventor by the name of Mac Radford has come up with two key innovations, a structural modulation of hemp and lime blocks, and also coming up with a molecular level adhesive that allows the hemp and lime to bind and hold together. So we're now looking at the opportunity to create a carbon negative building. So Just Biofiber, which you can see their website noted in the logo, it's easy to work with, it's non-toxic materials, it's exceptionally strong, stronger than concrete. It's a fireproof product. It can't burn, therefore it's excellent for concerning future wildfires and concerns. It's sound resistant, it's a breathable membrane, it has a high thermal resistance of an R36 on average, and the fact that it is carbon negative is absolutely amazing. Its longevity is recognized by the fact that hemp and lime were put together in the Great Wall of China and the pyramids, so they still stand, and we can expect our houses to as well. This image here is of the first residence on the planet that was built using that. But I wanted to just reference here that when we increase our insulation values, we reduce our heating requirements, and that improves the viability of renewable energy systems, especially on the home front in this situation. So back to here, we now talk about heat. If we're able to keep the heat in, now we can look at alternative sources. So things like internal gains, lighting, appliances, humans, pets, all of that is bringing heat into our homes, and that's valuable in there. But another critical one we can now take advantage of is passive solar. So having sun spaces on our homes becomes a critical piece of the design of a self-sufficient home. Here is a look at this one again in different form. You can see the sun space that's located here. We want to make it so it optimizes the sun in the morning. So our morning sun, the southeast corner, is a critical piece. We're not as concerned about the sun in the afternoon because that's when we're facing overheating. Here's a couple of images of houses with sun spaces in here. This is a story and a half with some rooftop gardens. Here's a more conventional looking home with a sun space on the southeast corner built right into it. So we can incorporate this in many ways. Now, when we don't have solar exposure because we're limited by the neighboring trees or whatever, we begin to look at what other options we have. Here's a suburban sustainable development approach where we isolated the vehicles and we created green walkways that walk around this, through this community of houses. And in this situation, here's a rendering showing the permeable pavers and the fruit and vegetation snack tracks along the way. What's really exciting here is that we were able to explore one geo-exchange system linked into each one of these houses. So the economies of scale within a neighborhood work much better for energy sources as well. So when we go to power, we talk about our electrical needs. In this situation, that's the photovoltaics. That's the critical one that's moving forward, that's available to everyone. If the sun comes up on your home, you have it. You don't need direct sun, you just need diffuse light to operate your solar panels. So we want to explore what we can do there in terms of power. Other items like micro hydro or wind are more site specific, and they may be more of a regional scale, as Pooran was referencing just a few minutes ago. Here is a picture of the same building that we've been talking about, showing 77 panels at 310 watts per panel, gives us about 23.9 kilowatts. That's actually about 3.5 times what an average family might need. In this case, we're doing it because we hope to share this with houses that are adjacent to it that don't get the solar exposure. The house in Souk, which we see again in this image, is now net zero in the sense that it uses net metering, but it is has enough energy for all the needs within its house, and it also powers 2 Tesla cars on a daily basis. We have the option of tying our energy back to the grid, or we can go with battery systems. This is a more modern version of the Tesla wall battery here, and that gives us much greater resilience. If you're tied to the grid and there's a power failure, you don't have any power either unless you have a battery system. And so the idea of incorporating that gives you that resilience that when you have extreme weather and power outages that last for periods of time, you've got the ability to remain normal within your home. So we encourage people to consider your batteries. And of course, there's massive development on this planet. Every country, every university is looking at improving the technologies that we have for renewable energy and battery technologies. So water, and my good colleague Ken is going to speak shortly to rainwater harvesting, but water also is a factor. We take these roofs, we want to collect it, but we need to consider what we're going to do with our water in here. And I show down here how we have an underground cistern. In this situation, appropriately located underneath the sun space, so we can use it as thermal mass for our residents as well. So again, like anything, like energy, conservation is your first strategy. So you want to employ appliances and fixtures that dramatically reduce the volumes of water that you would use. And then options like rainwater harvesting become that much more valuable. The other critical part of that is water storage and purification. And you can see in this residence here, all of the water storage, which is 19,000 imperial gallons, is shown in various cisterns that are built around the perimeter of the foundation, and we're sharing in the costs of common structural walls. But also know there are new technologies. There's research and development all the time, and promising new technologies that are taking water out of the air. And as those efficiencies become more valuable, we can begin to tap those if we're not able to connect into a community system. So food becomes the next one, and we want to begin to think about how our residences can be a factor in the food production. So we look at our options in here, and we look at where our passive solar sun space, designed initially to bring in heat for our homes, also serves as a location to start our gardens early and to grow plants. And we can tap into the technologies of hydroponics and aquaponics, as this image down here shows, to grow all kinds of food in our small residence. We also can take advantage of elevated locations for growing our food, as well as all around the perimeter of our home. Here's some other examples, some images of some projects in the past showing different ways that we've incorporated it. And I believe, and it's critical to identify that we, in order to grow food, we also need to ensure that we create the habitat for our pollinators. And so living green roofs become valuable where they're not being utilized for renewable energy and rainwater harvesting, although we can harvest water, limited water through green roofs as well. At a community scale, food becomes a much more viable option. And I'm just showing a green neighborhood project that I was associated with, where we were taking opportunities to explore the land. There's super fertile soils in one area, so we've protected that for community gardens in here. 360 feet by 60 feet wide, the most fertile land reserved for community gardens. We're taking our waste, we're running it through a biodigester and using the sludge, the biogas, and then taking the liquid effluent and pumping it underground and growing a fruit and nut orchard on there. Enriched nutrients from our own waste now helping us as we move forward. And we can always consider green streets and food forests as opportunities to include food within here. The last piece that's critical is we have to concern ourselves with waste. We create waste and we need to be appropriate with it. We need to compost and we need to recycle, and we need to do that at a community scale. But we also have to realize we now have the ability to treat our waste to the point that the effluent coming out can now be discharged directly back into our natural environments in a safe way. So we have new technologies there that we can work with, including making composting toilets and gray water options that much more viable into the future. So in summary, let's work collectively towards meeting all of our basic human needs, locally and personally. This is what gives us resilience. Let's build off the unification of this planet that's come together around this global pandemic, where we all realize that each of us only has a very small part in this. But if we all do our part, we can reduce this global challenge. Let's take that energy and apply it directly to climate change next. Let's create a green revolution, a solar revolution, if you will, for the future. And we need to do it for these ones, for the sake of their futures. These ones here that can't speak, and these little ones that in 2050, when climate change is going to be horrific, these ones are going to be in the prime of their life. Let's work to make the world a better place as they grow up. So I want to thank everybody for your interest in this and to wish you all a wonderful year ahead. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jack. Jeez. Always so inspiring to hear you. You're just a bundle of energy. And I gather you were getting lots of hugs and kisses today from those little ones. You have 8 grandchildren now?
No, I have 6 grandsons, and of course we're all in isolation, so they couldn't come and give their papa a hug, but they sent me a video that it took me 3 times to watch before I could see the end. It was so touching and the tears streamed. So it's special, and I'll be honest, it's a massive motivator for me, Francis. You know, a person at my age could think about retirement, but there's so much to do for those future generations.
Well said. And oh, thank you, Jack, for spending your birthday with us. We're now going to move on to Ken Nentwick. He is a rainwater harvesting expert residing in Langford, BC, on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. Ken is an educator and retired landscape architect who is passionately involved on committees responsible for setting national and global standards for all things related to rainwater. Ken is going to give us an introduction to this fascinating and important topic. Over to you, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very, very privileged to be speaking with such a wonderful international group here today, and thank you for inviting me. And I think that it's important to make sure that we always understand that this is global, but it's also very, very personal as well. I'm an educator and a retired landscape architect. And so what I do is I work with slideshows. So rather than seeing my face here, you'll see a bunch of slides. I tend to want to speak that it's a learning experience. And in the big picture of things in rainwater harvesting, we've come from what nature has established as an equilibrium for itself. And we have things that we've identified, such as rainwater coming down, but also being used by plants, evapotranspiration, and so on, infiltrating into the soil and those things. And that's what the natural systems really are all about. And when we have changed them and modified them, we come into some problems, which is where, especially in the urban centers, but also in rural communities, and especially here on Vancouver Island and in the smaller islands around, we have some problems. So moving from what nature has provided us to an urban setting, we find that we have changed the environment dramatically, where our plant material is reduced. We have soils that do not accept the water anymore. We have impervious surfaces of buildings and roads and parking lots and so on. And our infiltration back into the soil is completely changed. These things are the basis of looking at rainwater harvesting as an opportunity and one tool to work within the sustainability area and resiliency as well. Along the way, we've also centralized systems such as our stormwater removal and our wastewater and treatment and our freshwater supplies. All of these things together have changed things, and so we have to start thinking differently. I like to use this slide as an introduction to paradigm shift in thinking about water as a resource. And this is Stockholm, Sweden, September 14th, 1959, 5 p.m. Some of you may understand exactly what happened. They switched from driving on the left side of the road to driving on the right side of the road at that point in time. That is a paradigm shift. That's thinking differently. And we're using that analogy now to think about rainwater harvesting and how it works. One of the things I've established kind of and looked at is, how do people determine, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it something that I should be considering? And a little bit of a checklist here. Part of the reason for using rainwater, and it's maybe a little bit selfish, but there are seasonal restrictions or limitations. And it's kind of where people start from. Yeah, I need water. I could use some more water. What is the level of our indication of what type of water use we have? Of course, conservation comes before all of this, but this is kind of the next step. Am I interested in investing in environmental practices? Am I willing to do that, or am I not really sure about it? What about long-term management of a system if I put something in? Because it's not something you start today and leave tomorrow. You want to keep it for a long time. Am I willing to do that? It's not a problem for me, or I'm not really sure about it. And then, how important is environmental sustainability and improvement to my lifestyle, to me, to my family, to my workplace, whatever it is? Extremely, very, or somewhat important. And once we look at that, we can calculate the numbers and maybe say, if it's a 14, probably a good idea. If it's 10 to 14, okay. If it's less than that, maybe there's things we're missing, or you want to talk about it. Maybe it's not just the thing you need, there's other things to concentrate on. One example of a project worked on recently is something like this. The water system was bad. They were willing to invest. They were considering that they will look after it over the long period of time, and that environmental sustainability is becoming more and more important to them, and ended up with a number of 14. So that particular project is going to go ahead. Now, every project is going to require system analysis and the site analysis and what are the demand uses for water and so on. But it's just kind of an idea of getting people thinking about what things are happening. And it doesn't matter where we are, whether we're in an urban setting, whether we're in our elderly years, whether we're young families. There's a lot of uncertainties with climate change, weather extremes. Aquifers are a big question in a lot of areas, and water quality as well. And also in the rural areas, there are many places that are, especially here where we are on the island, we have a lot of small farms and a lot of food producers and so on. And they're very, very important to our economy and to our lifestyle and so on. But water is a question. So when we now think differently as rainwater, as a resource rather than wastewater, which is what has been considered for many, many years. We look at it as now there's a new source besides groundwater, wells, aquifers. surface water like lakes and streams and rivers. And in the municipality, of course, we're blessed with municipal water. You turn the tap on, what is the source? It could be varying different places. But rainwater as an alternate resource, whether for a single site, single unit, or whether as a subdivision, or whether as a larger area, it can be possible. Reason for that is that sometimes there is no other water. Sometimes it's to mitigate drought. Sometimes it's to manage the stormwater and flooding. Other times, habitat protection is pretty important, and fire protection, and so on. So when we start to consider those things as an alternate source, non-potable uses come to the foreground first. And these are very easy to do because we're not dealing with now the issues of drinking water. We're dealing with things that drinking water now is used for that doesn't need to be used for, such as irrigation, flushing, and so on, and many other uses that we can see on the list, and probably some more that we haven't thought of yet. But rainwater can also be treated and used for potable uses. All of those are possible, and all of those are probable. It's just a matter of getting to that point. And whether it's a small site, like I said, or whether it's a subdivision, or whether it's a commercial building, the system basically is all the same. When we look at the rainwater harvesting system, this is very simple. This is for a homeowner working on their gardens. They have a pre-filter where the water comes through first into the tanks. The tanks are connected at the bottom down here so that they work all as one cistern together. There's an overflow hidden behind here that takes water out to where the actual downspout is connected underground. And there's an irrigation connection here for the tanks, and a valve in here that when the irrigation turns on, it draws from this cistern. That's a very, very simple type of system and a very small residential application. All systems will have these components to them: catchment area, a conveyance system, a pre-filter. This is for debris. This is a flow-through type shown here. I'll show you the difference in a minute. Some sort of storage or a place for the water to go. And when there is a storage tank, it'll have a calming inlet so that the water isn't coming in to stir everything up, because there will be some sediment at the bottom. And then an overflow, because the water has to go somewhere when there's too much water for the tank to hold it. When we look now at the rainfall coming down, filling our gutters and our conveyance piping and getting into the tank, and the tank is filling. And then as the tank fills up, of course, and we're not using the water right away, then it's going to go into the overflow. As that takes place, this is us interrupting the system where this water normally would go straight to the storm drain or into infiltration. We're interrupting that with a rainwater harvesting system. What we might want to do is put a spigot, tap of some sort on the tank. We might put a pump outside and use it for irrigation or whatever we're using, or a submersible pump inside, depending on what the end uses are for. Now, the other filter is a discarding type filter where wastewater from the filter goes straight through here and out and carries whatever other debris there is. And there are different types and qualities of filter. The good water or filtered water can go back into the tank over here. All these pictures are mine. These are not things taken from the internet. This roof does catch water, and it does put it into the kitchen, the old kitchen in the back of the building. It's not what we want to see. These are the kinds of things that you look around and say, uh-oh, this is not a good thing to start with. This is a dried out summertime green roof, unfortunately, and it's just because of the summer drought. It's a place that can capture rain. It's probably not the kind of water we want to use because of a high carbon content to the water, and so we would have to look after it very carefully. A flat roof is maybe not the best place to capture water from, but it can be used for things like irrigation and other non-potable uses. This type of roof has some advantage aesthetically, not this one, but this type, but a lot of them are treated with fire protection or fire retardants. That gets into the water potentially. We don't know what's growing in all these little nooks and crannies. So when it comes to wanting to have water that we can use for potable uses, we wouldn't want to use that. Asphalt shingles are approved in the documentation standard we have now for Canada, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the best kind of roof is going to be something that's smooth surface that doesn't deteriorate like metal. And this is the place where the highest quality water can be collected, easiest to keep clean, and easiest to manage. So our catchment area is a start. There are other purposes for rainwater harvesting which collect water off the ground, but not for reuse in an interior of a building. I'm waiting for the MSDS sheets on the Tesla solar roof tiles just to see what they'd be like as far as a roofing material in a catchment area for rainwater harvesting. Elon hasn't got back to me yet. We have the conveyance system, which is the next part. This is where the gutters capture the water off the roof. We have a lot of places promote putting dams in here, which keep things from going down the downspout. The problem is that's what they do, is they dam up the gutter. The best way to go is to have a clear run into the downspout and capture whatever might be in the gutter and clean it out in a debris filter down the road. These are the types of things that build up. These gutters are not sloped well enough to carry that away down the downspouts. They're not going to work very well, the granular materials. We don't want to have something backing it up, damming it up, and have gutter tea, as I call it. We do want to make sure that the leaves and the organics and granules are pushed off. And on the left side here, this grating accepts the water. On the right side, the water scoops around the edge of this cover, and the leaves just don't know how to do that. In the middle one here is a sponge, and it filters out just about everything except it could breed bacteria. So we're not sure that that is perhaps the best way to go. Probably keeping it clean and having a filter that takes those things out on the way to the storage system. This is the flow-through filter here, where the water goes straight through, and anything that's in the water that's larger than the screen, of course, gets sloughed off or washed off. This is a discard filter, where the waste goes straight through and the water actually wicks, because it's running down the edges of the pipe. It actually wicks through a screen and goes out, and the good water then can be captured and go into a tank. That's the difference between those two types of downspout filters. Another reason here for looking at this different types of things, this one here becomes filled, can become filled with all kinds of debris. And again, you have a tea bag. So anytime your water is rushing through here, if that's not cleaned out, that becomes a tea bag, and all kinds of contaminants go on into your storage. This is good because it can slough off the top, and this one too, fairly good that way. And not only that, but these two here transition from the square downspout into a round piping, which is your conveyance piping, which makes it easier to work with. That doesn't work. I've seen that same setup for the last 7 years at the same place, and they haven't done anything with it. This does not work. This has problems with the piping. Across here is higher here, so this is always full of water back here. It never drains completely, and so you're going to get bacteria and other growth in here. And up in this area, we have something that's not a tight connection. These are some of the things that we look for and want to know. This does work, funny enough. Not recommended, but it works. And the reason I want to show you this is what a homeowner had to come back to fix over some years after they looked after the system themselves. And then they decided they would go to an option to add a filter to it. I only put these in here to say these are not the things that we're really talking about, but these are things that are happening, and we see them all the time, but we want to avoid them. This is a trade show talking to homeowners about rainwater systems. The water is collected here in a discard type filter, fills the tank through a calming inlet. And in the next slide here, we'll see there's an overflow here. So when the water does fill up, it goes back out and out the same system. So it just interrupts that normal system that would go straight down the downspout. Inside the tank, we have a submersible pump. We have a floating intake, so we're taking the water near the surface where it's cleanest. And we have a calming inlet, which works like this, where the water comes down this pipe and then comes up into the bottom of the tank and doesn't disturb any sediment that's on the bottom of the tank. Those are some of the most important things that are part of the rainwater system. The tank is probably the biggest expense. What does it look like? What does it work like? Where do you get it from? How big must it be? All of those things. This is a modular unit type of tank, and this is a pool liner type of thing where it becomes an underground tank. If this was a geotextile, this would become an underground soak pit where it fills up fast and soaks away into the ground very quickly. Modular tanks put together, and they come in all sizes. That's not a place to examine all the different manufacturers and things of tanks right now. But thinking of rainwater as a resource and how we go through the process is we start with what are the demand uses. And again, introducing conservation methods first, and then saying, now that we have reduced our demand, what actually are the demands that we're going to have on a monthly basis? What is our supply, our catchment area, and our climate data, and those types of things. And everywhere that we go across the island, everywhere across BC, all the way across Canada where I work, it's always different. One thing to remember is 1 square meter of roof and 1 millimeter of rainfall is 1 liter of catchment. We take our efficiency of the system into consideration, and then do a tank in, tank out monthly calculation to find the optimum or maximum tank size that we can use. And then we have to think of other things as well as location and where our piping is and so on, expansions and phasing and so on. It's the demand and supply efficiency and system details that we're working with there. In our design considerations, we're looking at the potable and the non-potable uses, but it's an alternate source. And as we consider all of that, we start looking at the catchment area as just the footprint. We don't calculate the area of the roof. We calculate the area of ground that it covers, or we just a portion of that roof. Our climate data is going to look completely different in different parts of the world. Toronto's is a different type of curve for the rainfall when it comes. And in a typical system, this is actually from a 3D model that just shows how the water coming off the roof goes through the filters. In this particular case, there's some of the water goes into a transfer tank over here and is pumped up into another filter there, the main cistern outside. And we have filter waste and overflow and that type of thing. This is cross sections, and as a designer, we have to have all sorts of information that shows the contractors how to build these things. Storage tank is there, overflow is there, our sanitation department is over here inside the crawl space of the building. When we turn on a tap, in this particular case, this pink means non-potable water, and it's going to go to an outdoor use. So it's filtered rainwater that goes through the piping and the system. When somebody turns on the tap inside, it becomes treated, sanitized water for indoor use, depending on the actual use, whether it's for flushing or whether it's for drinking, that type of thing. And then some calculations. Lots of math goes into it. However, what it is to get a starting point for how the system design is actually going to be configured. This is just from a Cowichan Valley system that was put together. Looking again at rainwater as a resource, it is so important that the CSA and ICC groups from Canada and the US, with a joint committee, developed a rainwater harvesting system national standard for both Canada and for the United States. This is the Canadian version of it here. This was developed since 2013 and is available. And because of that, the CANARM, Canadian Association for Rainwater Management, has developed a rainwater practitioner certification program based on this standard. And as this standard becomes more and more used here in Canada, then this training and practitioner certification program will become more and more important for people who are building systems or approving them, for building inspectors to understand how this all comes together and so on. That is a tip of the iceberg, I think, on rainwater harvesting. Again, it's one tool. It's one thing we can use in being resilient and sustainable. And I'm happy to present on this and to talk about it and to answer questions down the road as well.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you, Ken. I've often heard the term rainwater harvesting, didn't know much about it. I've been learning here and there, but that was the most concise and most understandable presentation I've heard yet. So thank you. And we will have, like I say, we will be coming to our questions soon. But first, before we do, we have one more person to hear from who happened to celebrate a birthday 2 days ago. So happy belated birthday, Chad. And I love how Jack's, you're on one side of Earth Day and Jack's on the other, and wow, you're in the right place.
Let's give it a big old Earth Day hug.
Yeah, absolutely. Chad, I just want to say a little bit about you. I'm just going to get a little background story to our audience here. Chad Thiessen was 20 years old and a Simon Fraser University business student in the 1990s when he and a few friends decided to buy and share a 4-bedroom condo in a prime Vancouver, BC location, close to the university. They thought they had it made. What should have been a practical and wise purchase turned into one of Chad's first big business lessons when they discovered it was Canada's first and worst leaky condo building. Many lessons have come out of that experience for Chad, but one thing's for sure, that project ignited his desire to create a resilient, self-sustaining community. Chad, tell us, how did you turn that situation around, and how does this relate to your passion for challenging projects, and what are you working on now?
We don't have enough time for me to fully answer that question, but to address the principle of what we're doing here in Earth Day, I want to really recognize the 3 men that have spoken before me. I wish there were some more women and a little more diversity. Puran, thanks for not being white. But the background and experience of these 3 guys that have spoken before me is amazing. And you see, just by Ken being the one specific piece of the puzzle and how deep he could go on that, and he just touched the tip of the iceberg. I'm the new guy on the block, relatively speaking. I come from more economic and social, and I've seen what people like these can do and are doing, and I've just brought them in as people I want to work with on a project that we're now doing here on the island. And it happens to be that last Earth Day, something you organized, is where I finally decided to jump in beside Jack and work with him. And since then, we've brought Ken on board, and Puran and I have talked a few times about things related to building a fully sustainable community, environmentally, socially, and economically. And what I learned from this leaky condo project was really the importance of persistence and a different form of resilience than what we've been talking about, the social resilience. It all ties together. And I have seen the worst of human behavior and the best. And I've noticed that when people come together, like we are now in this pandemic, stuff gets done. Important leaps forward happen. And that is just an amazing thing to watch. And yes, there's some horrible behavior going on, undeniably. But there are, and people on this panel being a great example, people working really hard. And this is an opportunity to move forward very quickly. So everyone who's here, we got like 200 people here. This is amazing. I'm also participating in a Social Ventures Institute conference going on right now. Amazing people doing amazing things focused on the greater good, taking principles like straight from what Puran's talking about and creating something tangible like what Ken's talking about and everything in between. So I think what I'll do is I'll get into my screen sharing, and we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of what it is I'm up to. So Futures Forward is the name of the joint venture, the social venture that our team has been working on. And it's basically to create a tsunami of global sustainable community construction. There, my heart chases after everything that Puran has done and struggled through, and I feel his pain and I appreciate his wisdom. And I just think this little cartoon is probably the best summary of where we're at. We've got people who are still questioning the value of resilient, sustainable communities. Why not? What's the harm? So, big question is, how do you create a community that lives fully sustainably? And I'll give you a really quick summary of how I see us doing this. And part of it is creating an all-star team. And you've met just two of our team. And I got to tell you, amazing. Also, looking at what's worked in the past, and that's part of the recognition of the First Nations that have come before, and many of their practices are really just a different variation of what we're trying to do here. First Nations did rainwater harvesting. You know, First Nations understood you build an insulated building. These aren't new principles, so we may as well learn from what's been done. Really, the big lesson is that nothing our team is doing is new. Nothing. The principles are the same. It's just how we combine them. And this is where the creativity of pretty much everyone who's sitting in on this workshop can really come to bear. Someone who has a passion about it can figure out how to fit the nuts and bolts together. They can take the deep expertise of someone like Ken in one area and make it fit with all the other pieces. And this is where I rely heavily on Jack and his experiences and his contacts, because he's seen all these little nooks and crannies where things go sideways. And really knowing where things go sideways, as Puran can attest to, makes a big difference in how you do the next one. And if we're planning to do this again and again and again, we need to have a deep understanding of that. So looking for the best examples and, you know, copying and working off the hard work like people in One Planet and all the other communities that are out there. And this movement is exploding even before this pandemic. I can only imagine what it's going to do in the coming weeks and months, as long as we stay focused on the core goals. Because right now it's really easy to get distracted by our fear of what's going on or our fanaticism about what's important. I could sit here and rant, you must do this. This is how it's got to be done. No one wants to hear that. It's important to recognize that fear can be combated through curiosity. Compassion and courage can create connection that allows us to get those Norman Rockwell kind of communities that are sustainable for life, where we know economically we will have all our needs met. We'll have food on our table. We know socially we will have people there to look out for us who will have the skills to support us. This whole concept of BedZed, where most neighbors know each other's names and connect with each other. That's a big deal. I remember living in communities where I kind of knew the names of the neighbors, but we didn't like each other. It's ridiculous. That's not how I want to live. And this entire project is to create a dream community for myself, my son, and the generations coming forward. So I again see sustainability as having three pieces. There's the environment, which is really mostly what Earth Day is about, but the social component and the economic component are very, very critical. And if you look at how those three pieces intersect, this true sustainability, fully sustainable, is in the middle. And this ties into the United Nations has a list of sustainable development goals. Now, if you were to look at this, and then you go and look at the work by Puran and his team, his One Planet principles, you're going to see a lot of overlap. This has been created by many, many people over an extended period of time who really know what they're doing. It's a fantastic place to start from. These are the core goals. And every time we get stuck and we have a problem we're not sure of how to solve, we need to go back to these core goals and get excited about the principles and be inspired about what we can create out of it by combining ideas. It's really about adding good rather than focusing on the bad or trying to fix what's wrong, adding the good. It crowds out all the negative and it allows for so much to be created, a spreading of joy. And it's the reason I get out of bed in the morning. You talk to Jack, he'll say the same thing. This is an amazing project, amazing way to live life. And it's happening in our own backyard. It's in almost literally Jack's backyard in Cedar, BC. 8.5 acres, roughly 40 homes, 90 to 100 people. It's exciting. So in this particular project, which we've named Austin Greens for a variety of reasons, one is my son's name is Austin. Another is the First Nations elders gave us a name that actually the first word sounds like Austin. It's Alstum Sween Shonatan, which means something shown care and respect, and small footprint. And that is the second name for our community, which I honor and treasure. And I think it sums up very beautifully who and what we want to be. To me, the part of the social sustainability is age-spanning amenities and activities. So young and old can work and play together. Bolsters and benefits society, because who are we if we're not a service to the society at large? Why isolate? Like, how many of us really like being completely isolated right now? Not too many of us. Part of why some of us may be here on this conference. Creates community connections. Preaching to the choir. Demonstrates diversity. So age diversity, cultural diversity, educational diversity, economic diversity. We learn so much more when we get to peer into another point of view, another perspective, see how other people live. And that's one of the reasons that my son and I value some of our global travel immensely, because it really helps us grasp what's important, and it gives us new ideas about how to design a sustainable community. And it's a treasure, an absolute treasure. And of course, self-sustaining. If we're going to create a template that can be used pretty much anywhere on the planet with appropriate tweaking, we need to really grasp what it means to be self-sustaining. And of course, conservation is part of that. But at the same time, we're not looking to completely sacrifice our lifestyle. And technology has allowed us to peer into ways to really enjoy our life, but at the same time, not devastate the resources of our planet. And some of them would be an example of a recirculating shower. I personally love long showers, but I'm always afraid to take them. But if I had a recirculating shower, and I do want to get one, I can hang out there for half an hour and not feel guilty. That'd be pretty nice. All right, sounds great. So why aren't these communities everywhere already? I mean, they've been built in England. You've got Bedset as a perfect example. One Brighton is another example they've worked on. One of the big ones that we found is bureaucratic barriers. Going back to fear, there is a lot of fear among people who are responsible for making policies and decisions. Some of them are worried they're going to get sued and lose their homes, but most of them really want to see sustainability. They just don't know how. So we need people who are wise enough and creative enough to find ways to break through those barriers rather than just following rules to the letter. Find a way to meet all the needs of people in terms of safety and everything they need to live fully, but move forward. Right now, it can take up to 1.5 years in extra delays if you want to build a sustainable house. Forget a community. And the amount of time that Jack has spent working on our piece of land is staggering. And his commitment is unwavering, and I'm somewhat in awe of it, frankly. But that's something that we all need to work together to address. Lack of economies of scale. Building some people like, oh, I want a tiny house. That's great, but it's very expensive to build one tiny house. And the insulation factor, or R value, as some of us were referring to, is not good. The economies of scale by building more and bigger allows us to reduce costs and improve efficiencies dramatically. And most projects are not there yet, especially because it's too hard to do that. So they give up. And a lack of knowledge. Frances is an example of someone who understands so many things about sustainability at large. And of course, she's learning new things from Ken right now, who's an amazing expert in his field. But there's so much to learn. So I invite all of you to get excited about adding the good of learning new things about how you can be practically sustainable in your home. I can tell you right now, my son and I are experimenting with aquaponics in our living room. Why? Because it is fun. And we get to try out new ways of being more responsible, and the fish are cool, and we get to try and grow new herbs. We're adding good and thinking big about how it can apply in the larger sense. Let's end with what you can do. Make a public commitment to sustainable living. And by that, I mean, you can actually write down for you what this means and what you plan to do. And next Earth Day, you can look at that. But tell your friends, invite your friends to join you and come up with ideas. Make it a coffee conversation on a dinner night together, a virtual chat about it. It's kind of interesting what you might come up with. Go to futuresforward.org, join the email list. We send out all sorts of neat little tidbits, whether it's a way to stay socially connected or learn new skills or a new product that's come on the market. It's a great way to find out about those. Do what you're doing right now. Attend events and share your knowledge with other people. CreativelyUnited.org has a list of these events and has a bunch of videos of past events. Go there, check them out, enjoy. Support sustainable practices. Those policymakers who are living in fear, help them move forward. Make sure they know what it is you expect them to do immediately and an ongoing basis. They have the ability to make changes. We've seen it happen. In weeks, health policy has been dramatically overhauled. Something that would take years or decades in the past. This is a huge opportunity. Go to them, tell them, organize campaigns to tell them. The more people that knock on their doors, the more they will respond. And for projects like ours, the individuals you see on the panel, connect us with builders and landowners who want to be part of this tsunami of community construction. Love to speak to any and all of you who have ideas to share or want to get involved.
Thank you, Chad. That was great. Thank you so much. What a wealth of knowledge. And there's your gorgeous son, Austin, there. So we're going to take some questions now from our attendees, and I'm just going to work our way through because we have quite a number and they're really great questions. Good question. This is from a Francis, not me, but how do disabled people cope without transport in one planet or in one Brighton?
Actually, I should say we don't have any parking except for disabled people and for car clubs. So there is disabled parking there. So.
Oh, that's great. And Porin, One Planet involves small and new communities. Please comment about fitting change into existing large cities. Is there, what's
the so I think, so for example, I mean, just our case, we introduced the first car sharing scheme into England, and then actually it became, you know, we had to change planning policy to allow us to build fewer parking spaces. With development, so there used to be a requirement for a minimum number, but we had the first planning permission in the UK, or entitlement, in which we said we'll reduce parking but introduce a car sharing scheme. And in fact, now there's several thousand cars, you know, in car sharing schemes around the UK. So and they're moving, and not just in new developments but in existing areas as well. So there are various sorts of interventions you can do in existing communities, and of course there are opportunities for increasing insulation, opportunities for you know, food growing in gardens. So there are all sorts of things you can do in existing areas as well. It's not quite as easy as starting with a new development, but it can be done.
Excellent. This is from an anonymous attendee. As an ex-regulator from an environmental agency, I'm interested if you ran into any barriers for getting approvals for your development, Poran. Which jurisdictions were most progressive?
You know, you know, a couple of times we've you know, we've run up against that issue, and sometimes we've managed to change regulations, sometimes we haven't. You know, the car parking thing was something we changed, which ended up as a national change in policy. Which jurisdictions are most progressive? You know, the trouble is, I would say it's getting harder and harder now, because we got layers and layers of regulation, that it's becoming, I would say, in many cases harder to do innovative stuff than it used to be. And one thing we lost, for example, was the ability to reuse some of the rainwater in our toilets at BedZ. And part of the reason for that was that actually the health and safety department wouldn't sign it off, just in case someone, you know, drank from the bowl in the toilet, you know. You know, there were issues there that actually, which meant because it wasn't signed off for there, we couldn't get insurance to do it. So, you know, there are issues like that. And it is a bugbear for me that actually we have regulated so much and we have such a strange attitude to risk now. You know, that actually it's going to be the death of us. You know, so we really have to start getting much more common sense regulation in, and we have to be much more balanced in our risk taking. That actually trying to avoid every bit of risk actually creates more risk.
Mm-hmm. Kathy here is asking, Poran, you address situations that are mainly urban. Rural living requires a car. So what do you suggest for transportation in a rural situation?
Look, I think that what I said is reduce car use. So our developments do have cars in, and we have done rural developments. We just try and reduce it. Maybe not, you know, so for example, rather than have 3-car households, get it to a 1-car household and a car sharing scheme. Also, it does make the issue. So I'm not saying get rid of cars completely. Whenever you can, it is the single best thing you can do. And also we have to think about where we provide housing. So sprawling suburbs, of course, are the worst in terms of sustainability overall. It's hardest to provide, you know, good public transit. So we need to think about where we want to build homes as well. You know, but yeah, of course, in rural areas there are other things you can do. You can do much more on local food. Think about an electric car. Think about an electric bike rather than a car. You know, so there are all sorts of things that you can do in all sorts of situations. So everyone, wherever they are, can actually lead a one planet life. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. There's certain advantages you get in high density urban developments, and there's certain advantages you get in rural areas. You just express your lifestyle in different ways in those two situations.
Right. I'm going to jump to a question for Jack. This from Ella. Is the horizontal one-sided roof most efficient for solar panels?
The horizontal one-sided roof. Now, I'm not sure. I'm going to rephrase that. I think what the question may be referring to is the look of the house that I had shown in there had one large roof. It was orientated to slope towards the sun. So we wanted to maximize the footprint of that roof in that orientation, and then also optimize the angle of it. So in our circumstances, because we had an exceptional solar exposure there, we optimized it by going with a shed roof for as much as possible. And there's some small roof lines in behind there that add some lower roof lines as well.
Thank you, Jack. There's questions from Catherine. I love these homes and your incredible dedication to and research in sustainable home building. How can we make these carbon negative, low footprint, food producing homes affordable, such as under 100,000? I hope post-pandemic life will see a change in access to sustainably built housing so people will be able to live in healthier homes and pay less for utilities. If we aren't able to build to scale and to range of affordability, how can we take advantage of these sustainable housing models?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Obviously, new technologies come with some expense. And so as more research and development goes in there, we hope that not only do we become more efficient with the new technologies, but they also become more cost competitive. The other thing that's really critical to understand on the finances of it is that you may spend a little bit more in an energy efficient house, but your monthly utility bills virtually vanish. You're not paying BC Hydro or your local hydro authority for hydro on a monthly basis. You're not paying for water if you're using rainwater harvesting. So you pay a little bit more upfront in capital, but your disposable income on a monthly basis should increase. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. This one's from Trevor Hancock, who will be on our program on Saturday. Jack, how do you avoid sealed building syndrome if you insulate so much? Is there adequate fresh air intake? And how do you bring this to middle and low income housing in the cities where people most live?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge again the amazing product, Just Biofiber, because one of the great values of it is that it breathes. And so the airflow actually goes through the walls. And so you don't need a vapor barrier. So you don't need to create that syndrome of living inside of a plastic bag. But over and above that, we still want to have fresh air exchange. So a heat recovery ventilator becomes one of those products that we could certainly explore to help to keep ventilation. Myself, I prefer cross ventilation by being able to open windows low on one side of the house and on the second story on the other side, and you get natural flows through there. You don't need air conditioning in situations like that.
Wonderful, thank you. This one's over to Ken. What is the most popular use of rainwater, and do you see this changing over time? Has industry or farming ever asked you for assistance in uses of rainwater harvesting?
Basically, I think people are very, very used to thinking of rainwater for their gardens, for food growing in their residential lots. One of the things that is happening more and more now is for flushing. And these are things that in the Canadian Building Code is already approved. More and more, I think we're going to see other uses because as an alternate source, then we can reduce our dependence on provided water and potable water from municipal sources or from other sources and see it replacing some of those other uses as well. Over time. Industry is moving in that direction very, very quickly. I think that was one of the impetuses, if that's a proper word, for the CSA document to be developed, and that's saying we need some standards that can be used by the people who approve these systems and something to set a bar that can be reached, that it's not just anything and everything that's happening. So I think we're at the very beginning of rainwater usage in a widespread ways, and things are changing rapidly. And I think we're just beginning at this point.
And Cora Halsworth has just jumped in here to say, we should note that the SDGs came out of One Planet Living principles. Right, Poran?
Yes, actually, I can't personally take any credit for this. My colleagues, together with the Colombian government, held the first workshop at the UN to propose the Sustainable Development Goals using One Planet Living as the inspiration. So, so they actually grew out of One Planet Living, and you'll still see it still maintained the color palette, but they grew to 17.
Right. Okay. And we're going to take one last question. I'm sorry we can't get to more, but this one's from Brenda Stewart. She said, I tried to get permission for a composting toilet when I built a house in Nanaimo to no avail. Has this changed? Is there a consideration from anyone else on the panel about this?
I can speak to that, Francis, in that within the building codes are always improving, and more recently, my colleague Ian Ralston has developed new standards where composting toilets and greywater recycling are now have some allowances within homes. So we can look at this as a continuation of improvement around building codes. So, you know, I do trust people will consider you know, going back to the authorities and pushing them to adopt these options.
Excellent answers, excellent questions. Thank you, everybody. Before we go, I'd like to thank Poran, Jack, Ken, and Chad, plus our partners in this series, the Wildwood Ecoforest Institute Society and John O'Riordan of the Gail O'Riordan Climate in the Arts Legacy Series. And of course, you, our cherished audience. And we have one little treat, which I think might be a surprise for Chad, as his son Austin takes us out of this program. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks so much.